man who had done so much in his life. He's got a lot of cred. He has conquered the enemies of Israel. He has brought wealth to Israel. He has done so many good and wonderful things for this country. And people look on him as a man that is higher than themselves. And so to be in his presence would have been an awe-inspiring thing, no doubt. Just as there are contemporaries with us who, to be in their presence, would be kind of interesting. A lot of people talk about when they meet with a celebrity, or you run across a celebrity, and they have this term called starstruck, right? You meet with one, and you may never have thought that you held this person in very high regard at all, but when you see him face to face, or you meet him in an airport, or you meet him in a restaurant where you didn't think you'd meet him, you're kind of dumbfounded, like, oh, hey, you're Garth Brooks. Or you're Phil Robertson, or, you'd be mesmerized for a minute, right? Well, think about someone to the extent of King David, a man with his prowess, and how it would have been to be in his presence. Well, last time we talked, David had done some pretty bad things, right? Horrible things. And time passed, and as you get to 2 Samuel chapter 12, it seems as if David had gotten away with murder. Literally, right? Like he's got to the point where he's just gotten away with committing the most heinous act any man of God or man after God's own heart has ever done. And you ask yourself, where's God at in all this? Is God asleep? Has he just seen David sin and just winked at it? As if that's what that means? What's going on? Maybe sin actually does pay. Maybe David got away with this whole charade that he has just pulled off. But at that moment, just at the right time, God sends in Aubrey. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. See, for 3 of my children, it seems that I can do no wrong a lot of the time. And they'll imitate me and do what I do. And so I have to be careful as to how I treat their mother, because if they see me do it, they may want to do the same thing. And some things are appropriate for me to do, she wouldn't agree, that aren't appropriate for them to do. But Aubrey always seems to call me out whenever I do something wrong. My prowess as a father, she loves me to death. She believes, and rightfully so, that I'm the greatest dad ever. But she does not hesitate when I've done something off or something that's inconsistent with what I've said to call me out. My prowess as the greatest dad in the world does not intimidate her whatsoever. Well, David is about to meet a man just like that. He's about to meet a man that has that type of courage and that type of honesty. And man, do some of us need that. Because there's always that person who may know what we need to hear, but because of maybe who we are to them, they won't say it. And does that do you and I any good at all? If you know someone above you, and you know you needed to say something, you've held them in high esteem. And sometimes, friends, it even gets reversed to where it's our kids that we need to say something to. And because we're afraid to cause ruffles, we don't say it. Nathan was an extraordinary individual. David would have been quite an amazing man to be in the presence of. And in the days of David's deception, God does not send him a yes man. He sends Nathan. This guy's got integrity. He's got genuine concern, which is an absolute must in a situation like this. And he comes to David and indicts him with 4 simple, powerful words. Do you remember what they are? Thou art the man. Or in today's vernacular, you are the man. All right, and he didn't mean it in the good way. Thou art the man. So what about Nathan? What about this guy? What gave him the strength and courage to do this? And was he right in doing it? Confronting David, king of Israel, God's anointed. Well, to begin, let's do chapter 11. We'll kind of get a running start at this. We need a little bit of a backdrop as to what's going on in David's life at this point, because, kind of 12 months have passed at this point. Well, most scholars believe that 12 months go by before this happens. Look at verse 27 of chapter 11, 2 Samuel chapter 11. It says, "And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife," of course this meaning Bathsheba, "and bore him a son." But watch this. "But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord." It says it displeased the Lord. And you could probably add there, "and don't you forget it," at the end of that. Because we often get to the point where, can the Lord really be displeased with me? We never want to get to that end of the pendulum, okay? Yes, God is forgiving. Yes, God is loving. Yes, He wants to have a relationship with us. But there are things that we do that displease God. And in this moment, a man after God's own heart, anointed by the Almighty, displeased the Lord. Adultery, friends, it's a willful sin. Can we get trapped into it? Yes. Can our circumstances lock us into that awful scenario where we felt like we just couldn't get out? We're caught in the spider's web, so to speak. And we just get bit and couldn't help it. Sorry. Yes, we can get caught in those particular circumstances, but it is a willful sin, and don't you forget it. Put that at the end of that verse, and don't you forget it. There are things that displease God, and don't forget that. Now, maybe nobody noticed what David had done. Maybe he was in the process, in his mind, and in the kingdom, and in the people that knew about it, in the process of sweeping it under the rug. Maybe nobody noticed, but you know what? God noticed. And God hadn't forgot. God knew that this had taken place. And a plan would bring the King David to his knees, but at the right time. It would happen when God wanted it to happen. And God's good at that. Someone once said that not all of His accounts are settled in the spring. Isn't that true? Sometimes He waits months. But when He comes through, the proverb continues and says, His wheels grind slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. And really think about that. God may not get to it right away. He may not even get to it when we think He should. But when they do grind, God's wheels of judgment and mercy and love and all of those things grind exceedingly fine. He does things that we never even thought possible, even in the life of David. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7, as we've talked about before, "Be not deceived, God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows," what? "That shall he also reap." Will David be forgiven? Is he forgiven? And we'll talk a little bit about that, but it's immaterial, really, whether he is or isn't. Because there's always consequence, regardless of whether he was forgiven or not. Now, look at Psalm chapter 32. Hold your finger there at 2 Samuel. Look at Psalm chapter 32. And begin there in verse 1. Now, I'm going to read this to make sure that we don't believe that David's living the good life, okay, after his sin. Like he had forgotten about it, like, okay, I got away with this. He's not guilt-free here, all right? Psalm 32, verse 1, "Blessed is the one whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man against whom the Lord counts no iniquity, and whose spirit there is no deceit." Verse 3, for when I kept silent, my bones wasted away. Through my groaning all day long, for day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My strength was dried up as by the heat of summer. You know what that is? That's a guilt. That doesn't sound like a man who had done all the things that he had done and in his mind had gotten away with it. Friends, be sure your sin will find you out. David was miserable. Until he came to and admitted his guilt, admitted his sin, he was a miserable individual. Somebody said that guilt can be divided into two simple categories: true guilt and false guilt. And you kind of know what about get to. False guilt is brought on by the judgment and the suggestions of man, right? You got caught type of thing. People saw you do it and you're like, oh man, I wish they wouldn't have seen it. And you got caught, so you're sorry about it. True guilt comes from willfully and knowingly disobeying God. Psychologists described the way people handle guilt by using the red light, and I love this, that's why I put it in here, the red light on the dashboard of your car. As you drive along, you have these red lights on the dashboard of your car, and when they pop on, you have one of two decisions to make. Okay? You can either ignore it and just wait till your car does whatever it's going to do, or you can find a way to fix it. See what the red light's about, pay attention to it, take it to whoever knows about cars or what the red light means, and deal with it. Okay? But in life, here's what we do. We actually take and carry one of those little hammers with us, small hammer, and we keep it in our glove box. And instead of dealing with the red light when it comes on, we take the little handle, or the tool, out of our glove box, and we smash the red light out. All right? I'll deal with it. Pop! Now that red light's not on anymore. David was doing that. And that's what we do with guilt. Whenever it creeps up. Right? The red light comes on. Shouldn't have done that. I need to deal with that. I need to respond the way God would want me to respond because I know He's displeased. That's why I'm guilty, because I know God is displeased. And so I'm going to take this hammer and I'm going to smash that red light out, go on about my day. But does that deal with the problem? Friends, if the engine light comes on, you smashing the red light didn't deal with the problem. That's not sound mechanic work. But we do that. We carry these little hammers in the glove boxes of our consciences all the time. And when true guilt starts to flash, you just bust it out. And the problem festers, and it gets worse and worse. And then in a few months, the engine blows. And you can continue to follow the metaphors here. In a few months, the engine blows out, and you look back and think, oh, God has led me into this trap, and blame goes flying everywhere. He didn't heed the light. It says that David groaned all day with a heavy hand of God on him. He was sick with guilt. Psalm chapter 51 was written in David's journal after he was confronted by Nathan. Look at Psalm 51. Verse 1 says, have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. He's tired of dealing with it. Tired of dealing with the red light flashing. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you only have I sinned and done what is evil in your sight. Now look, go on down to verse 8, Psalm 51. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. There's a man that has full-on guilt and has bashed the red light out of the dashboard so many times till finally the engine's blown and he can't take it anymore. He can't hide it anymore. Yeah, I can hide it from the people around me. But you never get to the point where God doesn't know. And that's where the soft heart, the man after God's own heart, that's when it kicks in. It's not that he'll never sin, remember that, but that he responds when he does. And here we have David responding. All right, go to 2 Samuel 12. All that was by way of introduction. 2 Samuel 12, and you have this story of this incredible confrontation. Nathan comes and confronts the king. Remember, this is the king. This is a man with immeasurable accomplishments. Unbelievable prowess in the face of the people, and probably in the sight of Nathan as well. And then you have verse 1 of chapter 12. And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, there were 2 men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. So he's about to tell him a story. In your King James Version, and in the New King James as well, this verse begins with the word then. Okay? It begins with then. And the reason I bring that up is because, remember, we talked a little bit about God's timing. Then is important. Because after this, after David has suffered through all this, guilt ridden upon guilt. And again, this is estimated that the baby, the child of David and Bathsheba, would have been about 3 months old at this point. Now, I don't know that for sure. No one really does. But scholars say that there had been quite an interval pass on. God had let David suffer in his guilt for a little while here. And so Nathan is sent by the Lord. God lets misery do its full work. Now, if you are called upon in the future to confront someone about their sin, take a lesson from the fact that timing makes a difference. Timing makes a difference. You can't just come barging in right afterwards. God didn't do that. Right after David made the mistake, right? He didn't just jump in, God didn't say, okay, go get him. He let it fester. He let it sink in. He let the work of guilt do what it needed to do. So put yourselves in the sandals of Nathan. He confronts the king. The parable there in verses 1 through 4. Came 2 men in a certain city, the one rich, the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, and the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had brought. And he brought it up and grew up with him and his children. It used to eat of his morsel and drink from his cup and lie in his arms. And it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was unwilling to take one of his own flocks or herd to prepare for the guest who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared it for the man who had come to him. So there's the parable. So in a vulnerable, strung out moment, David pronounces his own sentence. He kind of sticks his head in the noose that Nathan creates for him. And once he does it, pulls it. David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. And he said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. And he shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing and because he had no pity. And here's our sentence. Nathan said to David, you are the man. Can you imagine a king's face when he said that? Can you imagine the king's face when he said this? He didn't know anyone knew. Probably didn't know that Nathan knew. And he certainly didn't think that anybody was thinking about it, right? Surely no one's thinking about this. People have forgotten about this. But he has been found out. Proverbs 27:6 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. So David probably had to take this in. Had to think about it. Does he throw Nathan out? Like, you insolent toad? Get out of my house. Get out of my bed quarters. Or does he take the wounds of a friend? David has had his friends say, "You're the man." Nathan goes on before David could say anything in verse 7. "You're the man. Thus says the Lord God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I delivered you out of the hand of Saul. And I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your arms, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if this were too little, I would add to you as much and more." God had his heart on David, didn't he? God wanted the best for him. "Why have you despised the word of the Lord, to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with a sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me." Tragedy, turmoil, rape, all of those things that come into this. It says, "I will raise up evil against you out of your own house," verse 11. "Take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun." David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." And Nathan said to David, "The Lord also has put away your sin. You shall not die." Mark that down. "Nevertheless, because by this deed you have utterly scorned the Lord, the child who was born to you shall die." Then Nathan went to his house. Recognize that. Oh, God's forgiven you. God's forgiven you. But the consequences shall be met. There's nothing you can do about that. You will live with those. Amazing response by the king. He does repent. Kind of reminds me of Saul when he was found out. How he repented. But I want us to think about and study Nathan's preaching here for a second. It was an awakening sermon that this guy had to preach. And I've had to preach a few of those. When it comes to having to say something that may not be popular for the other person to hear, may not be comfortable, is a better word, for the other person to hear. It needs to be said. Now, it needs to be said with tact. It needs to be said with love, first and foremost, obviously. And it needs to be said, friends, I want you to notice that God sent Nathan to David. So this was divinely sanctioned. When we're going to go to somebody, make sure that it's sanctioned by God. Make sure it's divinely inspired for us to do so, and not of our own desires. Not something that we need to get that person told. Make sure that God has decided that that person needs to be talked to, because that's why Nathan went. That's what made it so powerful. And Nathan's sword was within an inch of David's conscience before David could even think. Right? Right there at his head. Before he could even think about it, he had him exactly where he wanted him. That takes a man of integrity on one side, and it also takes a man of integrity on the other. God has called me to be a messenger to others several times. There have been times when I haven't done it right. And I'm sure you have the same issues. There have been times when I have done it right. When we're called to go and be a messenger, like Nathan was to David, and it's important that we find these type of, to not just focus on David and really kind of focus on Nathan for a second. When we have those opportunities, when you get called to be a messenger to others, do it right. Because the outcome of that could mean a lot to you, and it could mean a lot to the person hearing it. I don't know that I could have done what Nathan had done. I really don't. It's easy for me to say, well, yeah, I would have been that guy, confront the king. But I don't know if I could have done that. What an amazing task. I pray that I can become that type of person, to not only be able to confront that way, but also to do it in the right manner, and with the right attitude, and with the right heart. But we've been talking about sin and the Robertsons and that type of thing, how he chose to speak up. But you want to know something? I think when someone who is living in such a lifestyle, when they are finally confronted with it, I think a lot of the time there's a sense of relief that comes over them. If they have that heart, right? If you're dealing with the right person and you finally confront them, there's almost like David would have been like, oh, finally. Somebody knows about it. I can finally get this out there and start dealing with this thing. Sense of relief. And by the grace of God, by His will, by His love, and with His eyes and with His heart, we need to start doing that. First and foremost to ourselves, and then confronting others as well. To help, not to hurt. So, a final comment. A restoring comment is what I have written. The Lord has put away your sin. But your sin and mine do not come without consequences. Like David, yeah, the Lord's put away your sin, but your child's going to die. There are consequences to what you have done. And that's it. In our account here, Nathan leaves, he walks out the door, David's left alone. It might be odd to say that a rush of relief came across David, but it's all open now. The wound is open. God knows, Nathan knows, and David knows that God and Nathan know. Okay? And all that's important. The pus can run. I'll be as gross as I possibly can. And the infection can leave the putrid sore. That's just, it's huge. It's amazing how God puts little illustrations in our lives like that. Sin seen as that sore that festers. And I remember I was younger, I was jumping on the trampoline and I got all this water. I hit my knee and all this water went on me. I'm sure Dad remembers he had to take me to the doctor and the thing was like that big, man. They took a needle that long and stuck it in there and they had to release all that fluid that was in there. And when the thing hurt, it just awful hurt, awful. But when they released it actually felt better. When they got all that stuff off there. So release that, and that's exactly what sin does to us. The guilt festers. And the infection needs to be able to leave. And the only way that is possible is for us to come to realization that we have messed up. That God is displeased and you need to right the ship. It's the only way infection can be healed. There are two different types of things that we put off for this lesson. One, we put off the reconciliation with God. Two, we put off being a Nathan sometimes, don't we? Either way, whatever applies to us, we need to deal with that. We need to deal with it. As a confronter, you need 4 things in your equipment. And we need to, first of all, as I've done many times in my life, stop running off half-cocked and destroying situations that could otherwise been dealt with love and tact. 4 things in your equipment bag when you confront. And we're almost finished. The first one is absolute truth. And that doesn't mean I'm right. go in with I have the absolute. That's not what that means. What that means is that you go into the situation with all the facts. And do not confront somebody unless you have them. Because if you do, you're going to be in big trouble. You're going to make the situation worse than it already was. Have the facts down pat. So, have the truth. The absolute truth. Not hearsay, not gossip. Have the truth. Secondly, as we talked about, the right timing. The right timing is so important. Many are confronted at the wrong time, and as a result, you never get another opportunity to deal with it. Timing is important. You don't want people driven deeper into their wrong because you chose to come at a time that was convenient to you and not to them. Thirdly, wise wording. Nathan just didn't go up to David and say, "Man, you messed up. That was a bad thing you did." He went in, and I love it because it's much like our Lord did, wasn't it? All the parables that He used. Nathan goes in with a parable. Let me tell you about this. Get the individual to acknowledge their sin. Don't go in and tell them that they're wrong. Go in helping them to understand and realizing that they're wrong. Do you see the difference in that? Nathan allowed David to hang himself with that story. Clever, wasn't it? Clever. David's a smart man, but still got him. When we're stuck in sin and guilt is blinding us, we're ignorant. It's the bottom line. And Nathan was able to do that with David. So, absolute truth, the right timing, good wording, that could also be seen as tactful words. And then finally, fearless courage. You have nothing to lose if you do it in the Spirit of Christ. If I come to an individual in the Spirit of Christ, that means there is absolutely nothing in it for me. Nothing in it for me. And it's all about him or her. You have nothing to lose if you come in that spirit. Doesn't that give you courage? You would have more courage if you came with that spirit. And if the Lord's really in it, you'll become a better friend to that person. I believe that. So, the two things. Have we been holding back from confronting another? If we have, then we need to question our true love for that individual. And are we looking at that person through God's eyes? Secondly, and this is something only we can answer for ourselves, is are we hiding something? If we are hiding something, how's that guilt festering within us? And wouldn't it be better just to go ahead and open the sore, deal with it, and make a better relationship between our God and ourselves? That's all I had. Brent, if you would lead us in a song.
953, 953. 953. Go with these things. Lord, I lift your name on high.